it's an absolute pleasure to have Rich Corbridge joining us today as our guest disruptor. Rich has been a leader in digital transformation and innovation for over 15 years now. He's been working with the NHS and has recently moved to Boots just over a year ago. He's also on our members advisory board and has spoken at Chief Disruptor Live in the past and has joined us in Chief Disruptor magazine. So we're honoured to have him here. His views are his own, not Boots, just to clarify. So today, Rich, we're talking about innovating through crisis. And obviously in the healthcare world, things are moving really quickly because of coronavirus. So everything's happening at incredible speed. I know one of the things that you've been looking at is this idea of in the next 10 days, we will make decisions that will see change happen in the next 10 months, and that will have impact for the next 10 years. So what is it that we are seeing now in this space?
So the change there, I think, is huge. There's something else that I think is worth noting. A friend of mine talked to me last week on a Zoom call over a glass of wine about the noise in the morning now, the birds speaking to each other in the morning. Because the world's so much quieter, birds are so much louder. And his comment was, is that because we can hear them more? Or is it because they can hear each other more? And they're all getting on the same page. They're sharing their news so much more easily with each other. And I started to think about that and applying that very much to a bunch of NHS colleagues I'm still in touch with, who are on a very amazing WhatsApp group of all the most fast-moving people with enthusiasm to make a change in healthcare. And what we've seen on that group is people coming together onto the same page, sharing the same news, reacting together, and driving forward in the same way, because the cacophony of other noise around them has started to be dialed down. They can hear each other so much more. And I think that from an innovation point of view has been really, really exciting, that the voice of change, the voice of making innovation happen is now so much clearer, because we're not distracted by anything else. We know that we have to make a change to get somewhere. I really love that ability now to be able to describe to a pharmacist, a business leader, a healthcare professional, a patient group, a change we want to make, and get almost instant reaction to, yes, that's the right thing, no, that's the wrong thing, and drive in there. And I think that's a big change that will really benefit how we go forward. And it's something we need to remember and use after the crisis.
No, totally. When you're thinking about this 10 weeks, the next 10 weeks is going to affect the next 10 years. Obviously, that's huge. Do you think that pressure is going to impact effectiveness of innovation, both in the long term and in the short term, as organizations are trying to be effective now, but also thinking about life post-coronavirus in a new normal?
Yeah, I think we must try to not see it as pressure and see it as opportunity, which I know sounds really crass management speak, but it is an opportunity. We have to survive. That, my organization now, many organizations, for the next period of time, focus has to be how can it survive and how can it help in the crisis. We then need to now start to already plan for how do we revive and then how do we thrive. When you look at studies of businesses that survived the financial crisis, nothing anywhere near the situation we're in now. They were organizations that stood up crisis teams very quickly to work in that crisis and survive. But also soon after that, stood up teams to plan for their future, to make sure that they had a revival plan and an ability to thrive after that. It's the speed that will need to be implemented to be ready to thrive after the crisis that's as important now as our immediate crisis reaction. One of the things in healthcare that I think we have to be really mindful of as well, though, is not just the planning for the crisis now and those first few weeks and the sheer panic in the UK and other countries, but I think that moment when the gate bulges open again and we start to see things open up and things start to happen, we need to plan for that moment as well, because the panic's the wrong word, but the excitement that will cause a sudden dash to the shops that may need to be empty, a sudden dash to the pubs, the restaurants, the parks that will need to be fulfilled, a sudden dash to delivering healthcare that people have stopped looking at. I think over the next week, we'll see an awful lot from the NHS about, please don't put off those urgent, important healthcare visits that need to happen. The sort of lack of people going to a GP, going to A&E to protect the NHS, which is absolutely the right thing to do, is equally as worrying now, as we see people with long-term conditions not having appointments and checkups that they would normally need, which could lead to an absolute explosion in issues in 2021 that normally health and care and wellness would have coped with. So we have another crisis at the edge of our periphery vision that we need to also be prepared for.
While we're in this current crisis and there's a sense of urgency to obviously be making change, so that, because life isn't going on as it was 3 months ago, do you think this uncertainty and this urgency that we're seeing now, obviously innovation is changing to account for that? Do you think the cultures that we're seeing put into place now are here to stay? Are we seeing a new normal being built at the moment? Or do you think once we head back to what we know eventually, however long that may be away, do you think we'll just revert back to what we were used to before on the innovation?
I hope, I hope we don't just revert back to where we were before. I see a willingness and an eagerness to collaborate. I see experts making sense of stuff together. You talk about huge pharma companies that previously would have been cutthroat competition with each other, coming together and sharing expertise for the common good of the human race. We're seeing people in communities standing up, help and assistance for each other. There's so much that I think will last from the crisis about how we collaborate, how we make sense of things. And it would be, I just don't see as a group of human beings reverting back to where we were. I think what we want from life will change. The fact that we have been deprived of that social context, that ability to contact and connect with people, that family and the wider family, will give us a new value of what that means. I think we'd already started to see a move to personalization and localization when it comes to retail. I think that will just actually grow and grow and grow as people want to support their local organizations. In my small town in the north of Leeds, you really see the small businesses being supported as they move to take away food when they never even considered doing that before. Organizations are really supported by their local community. And I think that will survive, that will to keep my local high street, my local community alive. How long does it last? If you look at other huge crises of the past, it lasts a generation and then the new normal does become something. But it is new and normal, not a revert to where we were before. So I think there are some trends now that we truly will have a different way of working.
When we think about that for how an organization works, the cultures within an organization, at an event recently we had someone saying that the culture of innovation has changed because there's the urgency that there wasn't there before, and therefore things are getting done so much quicker, and you don't have to kind of get the same sign off as you used to, and it's almost cutting the middleman out because the innovators are right next to the people on the ground who have the problem. So do you think from that side of things, with the urgency, as urgency kind of leaves eventually, we hope, do you think that's going to change? Do you think that will stay there as kind of a new way of innovating?
I think there'll be a lot of case studies and lessons learned. And if you take the standing up of the Nightingale hospitals as a prime example, what Shafi Ahmed and others have done at Excel in London that others have then repeated across the rest of the UK is nothing short of remarkable. In standing up a hospital in single figure weeks, day is technology that is so desperately needed to combat healthcare. That as a boilerplate of how to create a hospital. I remember seeing on social media as China built a hospital as the crisis first hit there, people saying on social media, well, that just could never happen in the UK. It would take us a year just to think about it. And then lo and behold, here we are converting huge areas into amazing complexes that will deliver healthcare. I think what's really interesting there, though, is that ability to connect and rely on such a wide set of expertise, whether it's the healthcare organisations of the UK coming together with the military, the IT organisations. You look at what stood up in the X8, the Nightingale Hospital. You were talking about competitive IT organisations, competitive consultancies, the military, the healthcare system, the police, everybody coming together to deliver one single function. I hope that's taught us how to break down some of those organizational barriers and silos that prevent us from easily working with each other. And that's a good lesson to learn.
So collaboration being the kind of new innovation almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Moving on to kind of thinking about beyond the crisis and what might happen there. We are, I'm seeing lots of talk in the media at the moment about what kind of economy we'll be starting to see post COVID-19, and how that's going to be rebuilt, and if it's actually a chance for us to kind of move towards a greener model, and away from hydrocarbon based models of our economy. Do you think that's too optimistic? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it is a new start for how the economy works. And I think that'll be driven as much by the culture of the spenders, the people that want to be part of, the spending ability in there. And it plays back to something else I said earlier. It's around that. I can't imagine a world for the next 5 to 10 years where health and wellness doesn't appear in the top agenda of everybody. That preparedness for a crisis will no longer be the sort of area of the people who are overly concerned. Suddenly people will now understand that being prepared for a crisis is genuinely something we all need to be able to do. Being prepared to look after each other, to have that health and wellness in that agenda, to protect the NHS, make sure it can deliver. and working that way, bringing people together, I think, is where that will come. Whether it'll inspire a restart from a green point of view, I think we have to hope. You do look at commentators that have said the current crisis has harmed the green agenda to some degree because it's taken the limelight that was absolutely arriving from a media point of view. And I do think we need to be just mindful of that. But I think we'll only know when we're out of this. And I think it will be somewhat judged by how long we're in this as to what the new priorities of the economy actually are. I think it will also be a little bit impacted upon by how well we cope at peak, at the moment when this issue really starts to be the thing that is only there for the NHS to help us get through.
It's interesting that we've got this kind of big scale climate emergency, I guess, and then we've got this very, very quick, something that's happened so quickly with the pandemic, and the response has been really fast on that. Well, I mean, who you speak to, but and we know that we've got this climate problem that we need to address, and yet it's not really being addressed. So yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about, I think. With just one last point before we move on to the Q&A. Again, I encourage everyone to be putting questions into the Q&A before that. But thinking about consumers, I think one big anxiety that organisations have at the moment is how do they respond to how quickly consumer behaviour is changing right now, and how do they even get those insights? So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when you look at the consumerization of pre-crisis and post, I think they look like two very different worlds. Both the things that are top priorities for us to be consuming and how we expect to do that. Organizations have been talking about we're a digital first organization for 5 years, 10 years. How many of them actually were has been really clearly shown by this crisis. And whether that's retailers that are finding ways to survive, to revive, to thrive by using digital as their front door, or indeed organizations that have taken the decision to close. We will shut the door until we're out of this because we want to be ahead of it after the event. And I think that's where we'll see consumers being able to pick and choose better. I do come back to a feeling of localization that I see in my geography at the moment, where I think people will revert to looking at the local organisations to support immediately after the crisis, to try and keep their own local high street alive, because they value the fact that currently they can't walk down the high street and do what they need to do. So I think there'll be a big part of how do we do that and where do we drive that forward. I hope we don't become a digital only consumer organisation though. I think that ability to meet the customer keeper, the traditional shopkeeper turned into an expert, I think that still remains important. And that is something that digital is still struggling to replace. Although we have good and new technology to do that, we still haven't found a way to bring that one-to-one, I need some advice, help me buy, bring this thing to life for me. And I think that's important.
Thank you for that, Rich. So we'll move on to the time of questions now. And we've got lots of good, interesting questions already coming up. So thank you everyone who has put a question in. I'll just start with one that kind of bounces off what we've just been talking about with consumer behaviour and what we're seeing there. This is from Andrew. He says, behaviours that are emotionally rewarding for people are the ones that will stick. Which ones do you think will stick for 10 years versus 10 months?
Sorry, Shama, the internet just ducked down then, so I didn't get that question.
Sorry, I'll just repeat that. Behaviours that are emotionally rewarding for the people are the ones that will stick. Which ones do you think will stick for 10 years versus 10 months?
Oh, wow. That is... I think that the emotionally rewarding side of health and wellness will stick now. I think there are people, and myself included, who wouldn't have been what vitamins should I take, how far have I walked today type of people. I think post-crisis, when health care has been so front of mind, people will be very much more looking at what does that look like, how do we stay healthy and well. I think that emotional connectivity to health and wellness will stick for some time to come. I hope it's 10 years. I know personally myself, when you're at home, you start to watch a little bit more what you're eating and what you're doing. The sort of social media moments at the moment about the consumption of alcohol going up, skyrocketing as people are at home so much more. How do we make sure we have those kind of things in our mind how do we stay fit and healthy? Because people will be mindful of this could happen again, unfortunately. And I think that might be one of the areas that sticks. I also think that experience of being together is something that people are missing now, and therefore that could be a real consumer play that will stick. Is that experience of sharing with friends, family, will become a big immediate reaction to that could end up with a real sticky part to it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Coming back to, I think I know what you're going to say on this, but coming back to the idea of the death of the high street, we've got quite a few questions around, do you think... I'm
losing the internet again.
Oh, can you hear me all right? Oh dear. Hello? Can you hear me, Rich?
I think we've lost him for a little bit, but hopefully he'll come back. So for everyone who's tuned in, please just bear with us for a second. I think the usage, as he was saying, has been fairly dramatic. So he'll be with us soon. I can see he's just sorting out a few things, so just bear with us.
Oh, Rich, you're on mute, but can you hear us?
There you go. I think it's internet activity.
Everyone's on Zoom.
Give me the second question again. Sorry, Shama.
No worries. So we've got a few questions around the death of the high street, and I think you've already touched on this a bit, and I think I know what you're going to say. But do you think the repercussions around COVID-19 will bring the final death of the high street, or reinvent it, or what are your thoughts?
I think we were already on a way to reinventing the high street anyway. I think that I love that localization, personalization part that's in there. A colleague of mine at Boots talked about the move from shopkeeper to customer keeper. And I think the new world will be way more about that personalization, that experience of being on the high street, the advice, the guidance, the help, the experience of being in the store and working together in there, I think will be really, really huge and a big part of where we go. And I hope that's the case as well, because I love shopping in Leeds and I don't want it to not be there.
Ditto. Well, maybe not Leeds. I've never been to Leeds, but. So this is a question around the collaboration culture we were talking about earlier, which currently is perhaps driven by necessity with the virus. But how will that sit with commercial competition in the future when business is back to normal?
Now, when I present, in recent months, I've talked a lot about David Holmes' piece of work around collaborative sense making. I hope that that's a principle that competition starts to bring to the front. How can we collaborate together to make sense, to win markets, to win position, to stay alive, to thrive in the future? I think we need to bring together experts, people who have huge experience, and share to be able to win and to drive forward. And if we can try and get that right and learn how we've done that in the crisis, then I think that'll help massively. The piece of work that David Holmes did is an amazing study in how he calls it the death of the expert. That's perhaps a little bit dramatic, but a move from expertise to a place where we value everybody's collaboration and making sense of problems together. And how do we get the most from that? And again, my understanding of how we've stood up Nightingale and the NHS generally and how it's reacted, to me, feels like the embodiment of that collaborative sense making. When I'm talking to colleagues and friends in organisations like NHSX and the centre of the NHS, you can fair see a completely different change of mind in how they're openly just collaborating and looking for people to work with on problems to solve big, sticky solutions, sticky issues that are there now.
Thank you for that. We have a few questions around innovation within organisations as well. So coming back to that, the ideas around culture and how that's changing at the moment. Steve Wright has asked, what do you see as the risks of extra rapid innovation at the moment?
I think we have to still have governance, and I almost want to kick myself under the table as I say that, because it's been a lot easier to move with a lot less red tape during time of crisis. But it comes back to that decisions you make in the next 10 days are going to be with us for the next 10 years. So we still have to be able to test and learn. We still have to be able to ensure that it's the right thing for an organization to do. Money, investment in innovation is going to be tighter and tighter. So that agile test and learn capability that we need to put into there needs to be stronger and stronger and stronger as we try and make sure that all of the bets we place are based on as much evidence that they will be successful, that they'll deliver a benefit, return a revenue, and drive forward an organization's culture or impact on the country we're in and the crisis we have. So I think we have to be really mindful of not let all the flowers bloom really, really quickly. Let's do it in a way that we can be really considered and careful in how we drive that forward.
And when we're thinking about the people within the teams who are doing that, I know that you've been doing massive Zoom calls with lots of people. How do you, I guess what the first question is, how do you ensure that innovation can still happen when teams are so distant from each other and everything's happening online? And how do you build trust with teamwork in a socially distanced environment as well?
Yeah, so I think I'd give a shout out to a chap I work with at Boots called Steve Goss. He ran a Teams call 3 weeks ago for our organisation, looking at planning ahead for big digital change. He ran that call with 100+ people, came up with a set of rules or ways of working, using the technology to ensure everybody's voice was heard. Absolutely astounding piece of work that he just did on the morning before opening that call. I think what we've seen using technology like Zoom, like Teams and others that are out there is you can still make it work with large groups of people. You can still make it work as a really instant connectivity. One of the things I've seen in post-crisis, since working in the kids' playroom, has been that everybody puts video on now. I think that human connectivity of being able to still have the conversation, and interestingly, just like walking down the corridor to somebody's office or somebody's desk to run something past them, I'm seeing that happen an awful lot. People just literally pressing call on there and running the ideas past each other. We were talking earlier and yesterday and in the last couple of weeks, how many more hours it feels like there is in the day, because people aren't commuting. People aren't spending that time getting to work, leaving work. And I think that's fascinating as well, is that we're using the technology not just for the hard and fast agendaed meetings that have to happen, but also just to share a glass of coffee, a cup of coffee and a conversation, or, you know, a 6:30 glass of wine and a natter about what's gone on in the day, has been really powerful from a sharing point of view. It does make me wonder whether, well, that's one of the things I can't see us going back to as normal. Those big office complexes with thousands of people in them. I just think we've perhaps learned at last that this does work. And the worst for that, I absolutely hated working from home pre-crisis, and have found a way to make it work for me, which is really, really interesting, from being able to collaborate and being able to share.
We've just had Sean Taylor comment here. A great example is Stan McChrystal holding a call with 7,000 people every day. So I don't know how that would work, but it sounds like utter carnage, but that's very impressive.
That is impressive.
I think one thing that lots of people are thinking at the moment, whether it's leaders of organizations or kind of employees as well, do you think in this new working from home situation that it's going to be a lot more common as we move out of lockdown? Yeah,
I do. I think it's taught me that I don't need to go from Leeds to Nottingham every day, that's for sure. And indeed, you know, the travel to London to see you guys, to be with colleagues in London, I think we'll realise and have realised that if you've got the technology and the bandwidth right, then you can make it work. So I do see us doing that collaboration a lot more, using tech to do it. I think it's helped hugely to be able to do that. We've learned lots of different tricks of the trade of doing that. You look at the NHS, has become Teams is just ubiquitous across the entire NHS now. Whenever you're talking to anybody in the NHS, they're on Teams. It's easier than picking up the phone in the area of Leeds I live in, where there isn't an awful lot of phone signal. So Teams has become just the thing that we live on.
That, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I think I'm missing the water cooler moments. But yeah, I think it'll be.
You can create those. You can still create the water cooler moments though. Virtual coffee breaks, quizzes for teams. We've had late night poker nights with colleagues. There's a lot of ways to. It's not a replacement. It absolutely isn't a replacement of that human connection. But it's a way of getting as much as possible from that connectivity in there.
Totally. So coming back to this idea of innovation within teams, we have a question here from Raj Sangha, who says, COVID-19 has meant many retailers putting together task teams. However, in the new normal, I've read that really badly. COVID-19 has meant many retailers are putting together task teams in the new normal. But what's your view on many retailers resorting to internal siloed teams, resulting in slow delivery of innovation?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's almost one of the core themes we've been talking about through the whole thing, is that collaborative sense making, that ability to work with new people, different people, for small snippets of time, bringing organizations together that wouldn't normally have worked together, has been a really big trend that we've seen, whether it's the NHS and, you know, organizations like Wi-Fi Spark and Steve Killick's team there, who've done amazing work rolling out laptops and capability for patients to be able to speak to family at home at a pace that you would have never even thought possible, because they've been able to collaborate with lots of different parts of an organization for 10 minutes, for 15 minutes, just help me get this one thing done and out the other door. I think that mirrored across retail, across other organizations, almost one of the biggest learning points, whether it is, Sanofi and GSK collaborating as two competitor organizations on pandemic responses, or whether it is NHS IT functions that previously didn't work that well together, collaborating on how they roll video connectivity out across 2 or 3 different hospital trusts. We're seeing collaboration be the watchword, and that has to be across silos in organizations as much as it has to be across organizations that previously were in competition with each other.
On that, we have a question here from Andrew Mann. What lessons are you taking from previous recessions that can be advice for innovators at the moment?
Yeah, I think that goes back to that survive, revive, thrive play. There was some stuff written in the last 7 days by a couple of the big consultancy houses around comparisons to the financial crisis, and organizations that came out of it 10, 15 points higher than going into it, because they didn't just plan and have a crisis team. They set up how do we thrive after the crisis? What is the bets we place to make sure we're in the right position post crisis? I think that's the important part, is we need a team of people to make sure we survive. We need a team of people to make sure we revive quickly, but we also need to have an eye on what thriving looks like in the future, and being able to take that from financial crisis issues around organizations that came from ashes of failed organizations, all the way through to those that that grew up off the back of that. What's the new social need that's out there? I personally believe, and I think that's probably come across, that health and care and wellness will be mega trends for the next 10 years as people focus so much more on what that means. That social activity and connectivity will be a big part, as will planning for, God forbid, the next crisis. I actually think that the next 10 years will put governments across the world in a position where they don't do things like collapse the CDC pandemic organization, but actually start to understand how do we plan for that in the future, and invest in that, and make sure that we're ready for the next panic situation, as opposed to burying our heads in the sand a little bit. I know from sat in at my desk with colleagues in the early stages of COVID, saying those awful words now of, oh, it's just a bad flu, we'll be okay sort of scenario, and look at where we are now, not planning closely enough and well enough for where and the impact it's had on what we're doing.
We have time for, I think, a couple more questions. One from Randall Livingston. Where there are insufficient personal funds because of job loss, will people choose food first and then health issues? How do you think that's going to play out?
Crikey, that's a social comment.
Big question.
I mean, people are going to choose to eat first and health second, and ever has that been so, unfortunately, hasn't it? I think there's ways that socially, as a nation, we can come together to try and help and understand how we make the pound last better, and how we enable families, individuals to be able to focus on both. I think if we are genuinely looking at the sort of shrinking of the economy size that's now predicted, then that localization of help that we give each other needs to become more and more important already. We're seeing, people who live near to each other helping each other so much more. I'm not suggesting that their whole world becomes reliant on the helpful hand of the next door neighbor, but I do think there'll be more of that willing to happen. I think health wellness needs to be at a price point that enables it to be democratized across the whole population as well. And I know from my own sort of campaign championing that we try and find a way to make sure that the separation of health and care and wellness starts to be knocked down, and we start to understand how we help people stay well so they don't need care in the health system. We have a national health service that looks after sick people, doesn't drive health of people, and therefore there's a place for us all to try and help with each other's wellness, whether that's mental health or physical health. And I do wonder as well if that mental health and the wellness of our minds and how we interact is something we also need to be mindful of as we come out of crisis as well. There's a lot of people that will have been more severely impacted by this, from isolation, from being alone, being at home. If any of you remember the band Everything But the Girl, Ben Watt is in isolation himself at the moment because of underlying health element that he has. If you follow him on social media and you really see the brain of somebody who is struggling unbelievably in isolation at the moment, and the help he's taking from fans of his old band and his own artist work at the moment is fascinating. And I hope that we start to support people more and more in that way.
Well, thank you so much, Rich, for answering all of those questions and sharing your insights. We don't have any more time today, sadly, but we can be continuing the conversation online on LinkedIn. Emma, I'll hand back to you, but thank you so much, Rich, for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Shamra. It's been good fun.
And just to echo what Shama said, Rich, this has been invaluable. Thank you very much indeed. I think we've covered an awful lot of ground, both across industries, across in depth in the healthcare service, but also into the economy and how we really do try to, as you say, pull through this and look beyond and go into that next decade. And there is signs of opportunity as well as obviously grave circumstances for many. So thank you, Rich, Gigi, and indeed Shama to you. This Breakfast Club was launched very much because we felt we wanted to communicate and work with and talk with members and partners as much as possible, but also to really be a launch pad into our next Chief Disruptor Live, which will be virtual on the 2nd of June. So please do let us know if you'd like to join that. There are ways of registering through www.nimbus90.com, and also indeed you will be able to see some of our latest virtual events that we're running outside the Breakfast Club.